That's loud. Should I move that a little bit?
I got you.
All right. Well, thank you, Dave. I feel very tall up here. Thanks for hosting this event. I've been looking forward to it for a while. This is my first in-person author event. So it's nice to see people in person and not as images on screens. And I want to start by saying that I never intended to write a book. What I intended to do was to get more resources in the hands of the people that worked for me at a time I couldn't afford to pay for them. And I wanted to do this because in the late 90s, I had a lot of problems getting people to come to work and stay at work. And I learned that other employers around me were having the same problem. And that story's in the book. It's called The Rooftop. But I also came to the realization that most people didn't come to work late, not show up to work because they were indifferent or they didn't care. But it was because there were complexities in their lives that forced them to prioritize work differently than most people that are in this room. And I realized pretty early on that one company my size, could not do all of the things that I wanted to do. We did what a lot of businesses do. We had a loan program. We helped connect people with housing, clothing needs, and food. Tried some childcare stuff, and it wasn't very successful. And about the same time I was doing this, about the late 90s, I ran into Fred Keller. I was actually trying to promote people who were succeeding, coming into organizations, succeeding to other companies, and Fred Keller and Stuart Ray owned a bunch of Burger Kings in West Michigan region. We're trying to promote people from Burger Kings to Cascade Engineering. So I started talking to Fred about some of those things, and ultimately I kind of explained to him that I wanted to do what he was doing at Cascade with a group of employers, and what did he think? He's like, oh, I think that might work. And so this story also is in the book, but he helped me convene a group of businesses to start this thing. But the paradigm shift here, and I think it's one of those things where, well, how did you come to that idea? And you sort of say, well, I'm kind of entrepreneurially. In hindsight, this looks like, wow, that's a really great paradigm shift. At the time, this was the only way I could figure out how to make this thing work. But the paradigm shift was actually getting other businesses to come together to work on a common problem or a set of common problems that they all have. Businesses don't traditionally partner very well on, maybe in associations they do, but on the kinds of things that the Source ended up working. So today, it's almost 20 years later. Our 20th anniversary will be in 2023. The Source has 15 member employers. We support about 10,000 lives. And it's been replicated in various forms all over the country. So that's pretty good. Now, I said at the beginning that I didn't set out to write a book. I didn't intend to write a book. And I have a few friends and mentors that like to play the protagonist role in my life. And one of them is Greg McCann. And he said to me one time, he said, you should do some public speaking. Well, this conversation came about because he was getting his coaching certificate, and he needed a guinea pig, and I was the guinea pig. And so I went through all these assessments, and in these assessments, I tested extreme introvert. In fact, I remember we did 2 days in Florida where he lives, and he had gotten all the assessments, and the first time we got together, he said, I got to check some of my data. He said, if I understand all of this correctly, you prefer working alone. Like, yeah, that's fair. And he said, you don't really seek others' input very often, and you don't like working in groups. I'm like, yeah, that's probably fair too. And he says, so I have a question for you. How do you do your job as CEO of a company? Well, you kind of learn some of these things because you have to survive. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily comfortable. But the point of that is, he said that I should produce a focus meeting. But then he added that it doesn't count until I get paid for it. So that was the metric I had to get paid for. So I developed some content around family business, surviving from first generation to second generation family business. And I actually spoke to some, family enterprise groups around the country. And I got paid for it. So I went back to Greg and I said, hey, I did it. I got paid. I was like, oh, that's awesome. He said, you should write a book. Yeah, right. So that kind of went away for a couple of years. One day, Greg and I were having dinner, and I was talking about source. And he says to me, I think that's your book. And literally in the moment, I was going to dismiss the idea, like, right, I thought, actually, I could do that. I actually could write a book about source. And so I did. And that began about a 2.5-year journey of what has become the source. It's a story about starting an organization called Source. In the introduction of the source, I mentioned a threefold problem that the source sets out to solve. And one is a turnover for business. So, you gotta make a business case. Why would a business be interested in doing this? And the biggest benefit to a business for doing this is a reduction in turnover and increase in retention. The second is around the complexities in people's lives. And so by doing this, you're actually helping people stabilize their lives. And the third is our communities. If we have people living in our communities that have more stabilized lives, we clearly have better communities. So that's all nice, you hear that. So okay, well, why write a book? So I want to take just a minute and try to demonstrate why this problem is important to me. We're going to look at a couple charts. This stuff's not in the book, but it's just to give you a little bit of an insight as to why this is important to me and why I think it's so important to our business community and potentially our country. So we start with Alice and poverty. I don't know if you know what Alice is, but for those of you who don't, it is asset limited, income constrained employed. So it's families that have at least one person employed. And we're just going to look at some Kent County information. So the government will look at these numbers and they'll have a poverty line and then they'll have the Alice, what they call it, Alice section. So the first set of numbers is total households and income, and this is 2010 to 2019. If you add up the households in poverty in Kent County plus the households up to the Alice threshold, it's 36%. 36% of our population, 36% of our households. Okay, again, we hear those numbers, we look around the room, and we tend to move on. The next slide. Let's look at what those numbers mean. So in poverty, 2019 for a single person, they're earning $12,490, $12,500. For an adult, for a family of four, $25,750. Poverty. For Alice, those may be hard to read, $24,000 for a single adult, $24,700, and $68,640 for two adults and two kids. I just want you to think about that for a minute. $68,000. Let me put that in hourly terms for you. Full-time job at $30 an hour doesn't quite get you to $68,000. So you gotta think about that for a second. We'll play one more slide, I think. For those of you that are in Kent County, the distribution wouldn't surprise you here. There's more people in that below that Alice threshold, 48% in the city. So it's an urban problem. It's also a rural problem. We've got Spartas, Cedar Springs, and then of course you see some of our wealthier suburbs, Ada, Cascade, East Grand Rapids, where it's like 12%. I don't think that's at all surprising. So here's what's curious to me, and this is again goes back to why I wrote this book. Who are these people? We sit on boards, we write checks, we mentor people, we get involved through our churches, but do we ever really think about who these individuals are? I would guess most of us don't. And I think before I started doing any of this work, I was the same way. I'll tell you, if you run a business that hires entry-level folks, you know some of these people. It's just a statistical probability. But beyond that, let's think about it. Person who checks you out at the grocery store, person who cuts your hair, person at the pet store, the manager at the pet store, medical technician in your doctor's office, maybe the teachers in your kids' schools, $68,000. So these are people we all know. So why don't we think more about this? Do we feel powerless? You know, as business owners, we look at this stuff and we're like, well, you pay fair wages. I know in my organization, I can't afford to pay everybody that comes to the door $68,000 or more. I wouldn't have a viable business. So what do you do? But again, coming back to why I wrote the book, I believe for those of us who have influence over an enterprise, our opportunity for impact is huge and immediate. We just can't go it alone. We have to do this work in collaboration. So my hope in writing the book is it will help business leaders see that the challenges faced by the people who work for their organizations, those issues are too complex for us to impact holistically with internal programming. But together, cross sectors in collaboration, we can and we need to build structures like the Source that can do that work for us. Because we have jobs and we connect with people around their income, at that intersection, we are best positioned to change outcomes by offering stabilizing benefits so people will stay at work, be able to work through some of these complexities, and achieve a level of stability. Ultimately, those efforts will benefit our businesses, our people, and our communities. So Dave, thanks again for having me. Let's have some questions. Yes.
What was your biggest learning about yourself through this writing book?
What was my biggest learning about myself through writing the book or going through the whole Source process? So, okay, I'll start with the book because that's probably an easier question. My ability to stay focused, it took me 2.5 years. This is a fast read. If you've not read the book yet. So there's an audio book for it too. And I had a friend of mine who wanted to read the book, and then he's like, oh, you don't have an audio version? So I only read books because they're audio. Audio books? What's an audio book? So I read the audio book myself, and I think I did it in like 2.5 hours or something. But man, I knew nothing about writing a book. So it's like, you should write a book. Okay, so then I hire somebody to help me do the writing. But there's got to be a cadence and a discipline. And when I'm very used to delegating work. You know, as a CEO, you build a team, you set the objectives, and they go accomplish it. There's you're writing a book, sort of like you gotta do it a little bit every week, a little bit every week, and then you gotta hit your. And then it was like the person who helped me write it. I said, okay, well, we're getting close to the final transcript. Now what? She said, I don't know. Like, well, what do you mean you don't know? So learning like what all the steps were, and then you have to find a way to publish it, and then you have to find a way to market it. I had no structure. So writing a book in and of itself was a bit of an entrepreneurial project for me, which was fun. I enjoyed that. But what did I learn most about myself in the process? And I'm gonna say something because we're here at Major Book House in a Christian setting. I think one of the things that I've learned about myself was, people will talk to you about what you're calling. Our mission statement for our business is to enrich lives. But I found that I think through this book is a really profound way for me to connect to my calling and to be able to have a larger platform than just the group of people that come to work for me and the group of employers within the source. But it's really a way for me to take this passion out to a much wider audience. And I think the importance of doing it, especially after COVID, with all of the complexities and the changes that are going on in the workforce, there's a lot of people that are asking a lot of questions right now. So, yeah, reconnected with sort of the passion that I did start out. So long answer to a short question. Anybody else?
What's next?
What's next? What's next? Well, what's next is I'm writing a second book. So then going, what is inspired to do next? I'm so fascinated with this topic, but I think that it's only part of the story, right? Getting people stabilized and getting employers to work together. So this idea of collaborating, I think if I had to say, what's the big idea of the book? It's to say, look, we can collaborate to solve these problems. And as employers, we need to take a leadership position. All right, that's book one. Book two is, we operate in a talent system. So my business operates in a talent system. And I have entry-level people that come in, and they can only go so far. In the very best case, I can only get somebody that comes in for a factory-level job to a particular level of competency before I don't have another position for them to go to that's a natural step. But there are other employers in my community that do. Now, it's a very complex pathway for that individual to go from my employment to somebody else's employment, right? So why don't we start building networks between employers? Because we're problem solvers right now. So why can't we build those systems across employers that will basically give people continuous work and education over time? You think about how much waste can be taken out of our talent system if you start looking at that one. So that's book number two.
Has it read reviews online or in print? Has it been reviewed online?
Book number two?
No, this one here.
Oh, there's been some reviews, but if you've read the book and you have some comments, I would love more reviews. So that would be super. I think I just looked at it today. I think there's 12 or 13 reviews online. So
Who's doing that kind of work systemically now that you were talking about? The talent system. Who's doing that kind of work?
we're trying to find people that are doing it right now, but I have not. It's so interesting to ask. The question is like, who's doing sort of what I would call talent systems kind of work right now. I have brought across some information that was put out that's been developed by the Chamber of Commerce called Talent Pipeline Management, TPM. I'm actually enrolled in their certification program because the content's phenomenal. And so, but part of what they're trying to do is they're at the stage of trying to organize employers around a collaborative methodology for doing training. they haven't gotten to the point of actually moving people between employers, looking at that as a total talent system without the disruption of, loss of wages and reduction of benefits, change, losing health insurance and other kinds of things families need. So, and I want to be careful to not sort of vilify employers in this process. I am one, so I don't want to do that. But when you think about how we start as employers, it's usually because we have a value proposition of some kind that we want to take to the marketplace. And if we become good at it, then we have to hire people. We don't set out to do what we do to hire people or to be really good at this employment thing. It sort of happens to us. And so I do, however, think that to be an employer that gets to stay in business in the future, you're going to have to figure out the employment thing. It's going to have to be a competency, because I think talent's going to be at a scarcity. We're going to have to figure out how to drive productivity across our companies, which eliminate waste is one way to increase productivity, right? So I think that reality will drive more employers to think this way. But we haven't found anybody that in terms of like handing people off, I am proud of that. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we're going to sign some books. Thank you for being here tonight. It's just wonderful to do it.